How the statist mind thinks about children's education. Typical reaction, Melissa Harris Perry of MSNBC in Tulane said, "Our children are not ours. They belong to the community. We have to break through our private idea that the kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families. Once we realize that kids belong to whole communities, we'll make, quote, better investments." Translation, in government indoctrination of our children. Controversial science standards, not yet accepted, lead to indoctrination as well. Fingerprints of 13 federal agencies are pervasive in standards. They dictate to teachers which concepts to teach and when, and have already been criticized for being overly ideological and of questionable quality. The standards don't mention the ongoing scientific debate over human-caused climate change and fail to even mention other potential climate change factors. Second graders are introduced to the concept of evolution. A group in Kansas has filed a lawsuit to keep these scientific standards out of public schools, claiming they promote a non-theistic religious worldview. There's a scary history of indoctrination through education in our world. They were called re-education camps in China, Camp Jihad in Gaza, the Hitler Youth in Nazi Germany. All of these dictatorial regimes understood the best time to shape a person's belief is when they're young and impressionable. Is a new test the answer to improving public education?
Attention, this is a test. This is a test of the nation's education system. If this were a real emergency, we'd find a better solution and move on to more tests. This is a test.
This is where Common Core begins to smell like rotten fish. When the federal government pays $350 million to test developers and insists that they provide input into the test content, they don't really control the curriculum, which would be illegal. More on that later. But there is a natural tendency for schools to teach to the test, and for the curriculum to be patterned around the test assessments. If the government can control the tests, they do control the curriculum. During the 2012 presidential campaign, Brian Williams asked Romney for his opinion on Common Core. Romney answered, quote, "There may be a time when the government has an agenda that it wants to promote, and I'm not wild about the federal government having some kind of agenda that it then compensates states to teach their kids." Isn't that what Common Core has become? What does a picture of the Leaning Tower of Pisa have to do with American public education and Common Core? It's well recognized that the university people who teach our teachers lean, like Pisa's tower, dramatically to the left. A survey of 151 Ivy League professors confirms this institutional leftism. In the 2000 presidential election, 84% voted for Gore, 9% for Bush, 6% for Nader. Their party affiliation was 71% Democrat and only 8% Republican. These professors opposed vouchers 67 to 22%, in contrast to the U.S. public where 62% favor school vouchers. David Coleman is the brain behind Common Core standards. It's instructive to understand how Coleman's brain works. He believes there's a massive social injustice in this country and that education is the engine of social justice. Coleman is now president of the College Board, which is aligning SAT, ACT, AP, and GED exams with the Common Core standards. In other words, Common Core can't be escaped, even by homeschoolers. David Feith of the Wall Street Journal had these blistering observations. Common Core is an obsession with race, class, gender, and sexuality as forces of history and political identity. Nationalizing education via Common Core is about, quote, promoting an agenda of the anti-capitalism, white guilt, global citizenship, self-esteem, effective math, and culture-sensitive spelling and language. This is done in the name of consciousness raising, moral relativity, fairness, diversity, and multiculturalism. Professor Dean Kalahar pulled no punches by saying Common Core is not actually about standards. It's about gaining control over the education system in a futile attempt to create a progressive utopia using the important-sounding academic umbrella of standards. This is about power, control, and the agenda. Common Core is just the host carrier of the disease. To really understand Common Core, and many other things in life for that matter, follow the money. There's bundles and bundles of money to follow. If you want to follow the money behind Common Core as well as other attempts at education reform, you must begin with Bill Gates of Microsoft and the Gates Foundation bankroll. What has motivated Bill Gates to invest millions into public education? Is he driven by a spirit of giving back for his great success story? Or is he driven by a profit motive? Or is it both? Gates has a long history of promoting education reform. One agreement, which is underreported and not well understood, is a 2004 agreement between the UN and Microsoft to establish a master curriculum for global teacher training. Was this actually the beginning of Gates' involvement in the national standards movement? With each state having their own standards, there was no possibility of the U.S. participating in the master curriculum. Gates and the UN recognized this. With over $63 billion in assets, the Gates Foundation is the largest foundation in the world. In 2000, Gates poured billions of dollars behind the theory, and that's all it was, of breaking up low-performing schools into smaller schools. From 2000 to 2008, Bill Gates invested $2 billion in 45 states and the District of Columbia. In 2008, Gates admitted that his project of breaking up big schools was a failure, but he had a new plan. He dubbed it the Turnaround Challenge. Teacher pay would be based on performance. There would be a data collection aspect to find out what did or did not work. It would also include national standards and tests, plus more money for charter schools. No one can accuse Gates of not covering all the bases. When he gets behind an idea, he rallies support from a number of spheres. In 2007, he dispersed $60 million in campaign funding to candidates who agreed with his education reform agenda. The result was major candidates agreed with specific reforms, including merit pay for teachers. Even today, there's a revolving door between the Gates Foundation and the U.S. Department of Education staff, as well as other advocacy groups. Gates' idea became the Arne Duncan's Race to the Top federal program. Race to the Top incorporates Gates' playbook to a T. Education reform efforts were included in the administration's $4.3 billion stimulus package. Basically, the states had to compete for dollars based on adherence to Gates' ideas, including student test scores included in teacher evaluation, implementation of a state longitudinal data system for data mining, turning around lowest achieving schools, and ensuring successful conditions for high-performing charters or other innovators. Remember, this was at the height of what had been dubbed the Great Recession. States were desperate for money. During just the first 2 rounds, 34 applications were received, and some states lacked the funds to complete elaborate applications. Think of all the government red tape. Gates opened his wallet and awarded 15 states each $250,000 to pay grant-writing consultants. Later, he extended his offer to all the other states if they met his strict criteria. Who says foundations don't set government policy? Simply follow the money trail. Gates has also demonstrated substantial political acumen. He knows how Washington, D.C. and politics works, including the power of lobbyists. He funneled money to election officials throughout their national associations. He made grants to the National Governors Association, Center for Best Practices, the National Conference of State Legislators, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National Association of Latino Elected Officials Education Fund, the National Association of State Boards of Education, and the Council of Chief State School Officers. The exact amount of these funds will be shown later in this report. Gates paid a lot of attention to controlling the media's message on education reform. Columbia Journalism Review criticized the Gates Foundation's large and complex web of media partnerships with PBS NewsHour, ABC News, and The Guardian, stating its influence on the media is growing so vast there's reason to worry about the media's ability to do its job. The Chronicle of Philanthropy also questioned Gates' bankrolling of the for-profit news organization and his growing involvement with journalism. But criticism didn't deter Gates. In fact, he intensified his overtures to the media. He funded the NBC News Education Nation, which include public events and programming on education reform. The programming aired on NBC Nightly News, Today, MSNBC, CNBC, and Telemundo. Criticism that programming was heavily weighted in favor of Duncan and the foundation reform agenda was simply dismissed by the Education Nation producers. Waiting for Superman, the highly acclaimed film documentary promoting charter schools, also received financial support from the Gates Foundation. Gates intensified his media efforts in 2009 with a deal for entertainment programming with Viacom. This included MTV, BET, Paramount Pictures, Nickelodeon, Comedy Central, and others. No longer was Gates content to merely advise a media company. For the first time, he would be directly involved in writing and producing the programs. While Bill Gates thinks he knows more about educating your children than you do, he sends his own children to private schools. And who can blame him? Let's take a look at how we finance the K-12 public schools. The annual cost is about $500 billion. Taxpayers provide 99% of the funding. Foundations provide the other 1%. Yet, as you can see, the impact of foundations on policy decisions have become extraordinary and all out of whack.
When Gates admits, oops, that didn't work, he's referring to thousands of closed schools and producing no better education from the disruption.
Plus, some charter schools fail to fulfill their promise, and we're left with the nonsensical teaching to the test. And who cleans up the mess? Or does it even get cleaned up? Jeb Bush, the former Florida governor and strong proponent of Common Core, has labeled anti-Common Core spokespeople as being conspiracy mongers. Does Bush have a conflict of interest? His Foundation for Excellence in Education is financially tied into the federal-funded testing consortium PARCC that received $186 million of Race to the Top funding. And Pearson, the multi-billion-dollar educational publishing and testing conglomerate, is a major contributor to Bush's foundation. Pearson has immense future profits with the forced replacement of the current textbooks with Common Core aligned books. Where does the real conspiracy exist?